Okay, welcome to our December Affordable Housing Trust meeting. Great to have nearly all of us here, clear quorum. We have, let's see, how many folks in our audience. Okay, welcome to those of you attending. Why don't we start by voting on approval of the minutes? And first, are there any comments to either of the October or November minutes that Greg circulated in the packet? Erica, please. Hey, welcome.
It's very minor, and I don't really think it needs correction, but I do believe that in November, when Tony was with us, we had made mention that we would like to see some comparison with some college-based towns similar to UMass. I know that the needs assessment has Smith and Northampton in it, and South Hadley and Mount Holyoke, but I think, we made mention. So it doesn't really need to be corrected because I think, it's part of the discussion of the housing assessment plan and the housing production plan. But I just wanted to raise that.
Sure. Thank you. Anyone else for any feedback on either the October or November minutes? In that case, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve both sets of minutes? It looks like a yes and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes? Can we do a thumb vote on this? Yep. All right, so done. Minutes approved. Our first agenda item is our guest speaker, who is going to be joining us at closer to 7:10.
He's on. Robert is online now. Actually.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Okay, so then
go ahead.
Let's go ahead and promote him and get going.
So Rob, I'm going to promote you to become a panelist here, and you'll hopefully have a pop up. Here you come. So I'm happy to welcome Rob Williams of the UMass School of Architecture, as well as a design build studio. And some of you met him when we visited the ADU under construction out by Olympia Oaks there. I'm forgetting the name of the street. But Rob's got some cool data around ADU capacity, and was gracious enough to join us tonight. So Rob, pardon my brief intro there, but if there's anything you want to add, feel free. But otherwise, I'm happy to welcome you and hear what you got to share.
That's great. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you and, hopefully get some feedback on sort of where we can take this project next. Let me get my screen share going here. Let's see. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this now.
That's great.
That's great. Okay, perfect. So this is some research from an ongoing research project that I've been conducting in collaboration with one of my colleagues, Ray Mann, who some of you might know, who's on our faculty. And what we've been looking at is ADU development in Amherst and Western Mass, and in particular trying to look at barriers to ADU development. As many of you know, or I'm sure aware, the regulations around ADUs are rapidly evolving. It was only relatively recently that Amherst and many of the other sort of towns in our region actually started allowing ADUs by right. And I don't have precise data to back this up at this point, but I think anecdotally, the actual development of construction in ADUs, despite these sort of changes in regulation, has still been fairly limited. So this particular project is trying to look at basically, to what extent are these zoning ordinances continuing to put up barriers to ADUs, and what are kind of let's say, the spatial implications of the current zoning ordinances. So we conducted a series of GIS and spatial analyses to, assess these existing zoning ordinances, how they might be impacting the potential for ADU development, and then hopefully use this research to come up with some recommendations for sort of policy changes or zoning changes that would support the development of more housing. So this is the current sort of a quick summary of the zoning regarding ADUs in Amherst currently. So we can have ADUs by right for parcels with single family dwellings. There's no special permits required. 2 and 3 family dwellings are not eligible for this. Owner occupancy is required. ADUs can be 50% of the primary dwelling up to 1,000 square feet. And in the general, they're supposed to be sort of located, behind, or at least behind the front line of the primary dwelling. And then of course, there's a whole series of other, general zoning restrictions that would apply to this development, including minimum parcel size, minimum frontage, building coverage, setbacks, 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, etc. Then of course, as many of you, oh yeah, Grover, go ahead.
As you're getting there, I was like, wait, that's not accurate. So continue.
Yep. So things have changed, or are changing, I should say. Yeah. So as I'm sure you all know, the Affordable Housing Act that was passed by the Healy administration last summer, requires that municipalities across the state allow ADUs by right on single family parcels and single family zoning. This is pretty significant. I mean, this is effectively eliminating single family zoning in the state of Massachusetts. And then also the law prohibits cities from implementing owner occupancy requirements, reduces the parking requirements to 1 parking space max or even 0 when it's within a certain radius of transportation, and also says that municipalities may not impose unreasonable restrictions, though unreasonable is still undefined, I believe. If anyone knows anything else, please let me know. So these are changing. So, and actually a lot of the research that we did before, some of this analysis we started before this was passed last summer. So a lot of what I'll present is sort of the current, right? And then we've just been updating it to see, what starts to happen with assuming this is all implemented. So our first pass was to look at the town of Amherst as a whole. Again, as we all know, Amherst is very much a residential town. 88% of the total parcels are zoned residential. Within that, 63% of those are parcels with 1, 2, or 3 family dwellings on them. So, sort of not multifamily. And actually, it's only 55% of those parcels that are single family dwellings, right? So we have quite a number of 2 and 3 families throughout the town. And then if we looked at, then we did this GIS analysis where we sort of tried to apply the different zoning ordinances to see kind of what was left over, like which parcels would still be able to satisfy those requirements to be eligible for ADUs by right. So under the current zoning, again, this is, before the Affordable Housing Act, 83% of these parcels are owner occupied. Then if you apply the zoning regulations, we get down to actually only 57% of those single family residences, right? Single family dwellings are actually compliant with the zoning regulations, like would be compliant with the zoning regulations if they added ADUs. And then finally, we did a little bit of kind of spatial analysis to try to assess, even within that, is there adequate space on these parcels to put ADUs, given trees, wetlands, setbacks. And that actually didn't make that big of a difference once we got to, down to this 57%. Then interestingly enough, if we remove the owner occupancy requirement from that analysis, we're still only in a position where 68% of those single family dwellings could be compliant with the zoning regulations, right? Which is, of course, to say 30% of the properties that, could be eligible are not, right? And again, this is all by right. So of course, people could apply for special permits, right? Carol has a question.
This is just the mathematical part of me, but how come the 63 and the 55 don't add up to 88?
Say that again.
Or it says there's 88% of total parcels, but then 63% have 1 to 2 families and 55% have 1 family, and it seems like they should add up to 88.
Oh,
I'm
there's
confused.
those are parcels that are there are parcels that sorry, it's of that 88%, right? So of the parcels that are zoned residential, and within that that's multifamily, and then also, you know, parcels that are undeveloped but zoned residential, right? So 63% of the 88%, right? Not 63% of the total parcels. Right? Do you know what I'm saying? Sorry if that was confusing. And then again, when I get down, this is also maybe confusing. When I say 83% are owner occupied, I'm saying 83% of the 1 family dwellings are owner occupied. So we're sort of, okay, we have to be, you know, we can only look at single family residences. 83% of those are owner occupied. So apologies if that was, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then we sort of jumped on to try to look at these at the scale of individual neighborhoods and try to see sort of how this kind of broad analysis was playing out at a smaller scale. So we picked a couple of neighborhoods to start that we thought were kind of typical of different conditions in Amherst. So one of them was Orchard Valley, which is a, you know, very kind of suburban development from I believe from the 60s and 70s in South Amherst. This is sort of between Mission Cantina and Hampshire College. And you can see here on the left, right, these are all the residential parcels in this. We picked a square, I think it's a square mile. And then you can see down here, all the red indicates the ones that are not eligible for ADUs by right, given the current zoning ordinances. So pretty substantial, right? And then from there, you know, we jumped into an even kind of smaller scale analysis of what we might call a couple of blocks in that same neighborhood. And again, you can see here, you know, most of what's in this case, it's not really the owner occupancy clause that's removing people from eligibility, but it really has all these lots are undersized relative to current zoning ordinances, right? So most of these sites are out of compliance with current zoning, and then would be sort of further out of compliance with lot coverage with the addition of ADUs. But I also think, you know, you can see from this map, right, there's definitely an argument that there is, you know, space in the neighborhood here for ADU development, particularly given how deep many of these lots are, right? We're not sort of missing space necessarily. Alex, yeah.
Yeah, I had, I guess, a clarifying question, and maybe our town manager can provide some insight to this since he's here. But I thought that the ADU law from Governor Healy allowed for conversions of lower levels and garages. So when you're talking about lots not having enough space, how does that play out?
That's great. Yeah, so lots you are allowed to, and if the town manager here wants to jump in, please do too. Yeah, I mean, even under the current regulations, garages can be converted. I'm not sure how that would be handled by the town if you have an existing garage on a non-compliant parcel, if that would require special permits or not. It's a good, you know, that's a good question. This also says, you know, we're really looking at in most cases here, looking at the potential for detached ADUs, right? Of course, you can have an ADU inside of an existing residence, right? You could convert some part of your existing dwelling. I don't know how, you know, that would be handled either if you're in a parcel that's non-compliant in some capacity. That's a good question, Alex. Where was I here? And then finally, we sort of zoomed in a step further, looking at a handful of parcels, and then trying to just sort of speculate on what, you know, it could look like to start adding a lot of ADUs in here, to sort of ask two questions, like one, you know, like, is this feasible? What does it look like? And what changes would be required in zoning ordinances to allow something like this would happen. You know, and again, pretty consistently, you know, reducing that minimum lot size, right, makes a big difference. And then I also think in these neighborhoods, you know, potentially allowing the reduction of setbacks for ADUs would also make a big difference in terms of how they could sort of be situated on the sites, right? And there's actually quite a bit of precedent within the neighborhood for garages and other accessory buildings that don't abide by current kind of setback standards. Then we also did the same, we repeated the same thing for another neighborhood that's over in central Amherst, near the schools. I'm gonna forget the names of these streets right now, but I'm sure some of you are familiar with this area. The
Grain
schools
High
are just
Street.
to the north. Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. The schools are just to the north of here. And you actually see a pretty similar config, you know, situation here where we have a lot of residential parcels, and then, you know, quite the majority of them are in fact not eligible for ADU development. And I thought this is particularly interesting because this to me is a part of the town where we might most want to encourage density because of its walkability, you know, accessibility to downtown, to schools, right? That it's not sort of out on the outskirts in large parcels. Like with Orchard Valley, we see, you know, what's really affecting it is parcel size and lot coverage in here. And again, I think we sort of looked at this, and obviously some of these lots are pretty tight as they are, but there's a lot of places where there is still, we could imagine there being ample room for the introduction of ADUs and integration of ADUs into these neighborhoods. One thing that really stuck out was there's a lot of these corner lot situations where you have these kind of long elongated corner lots that have streets on both sides. And I think it's actually seems, even though these are quite small in terms of the parcel area, it seems like they would be set up quite nicely for the introduction of some small ADUs that have their own access. And then, you know, sort of, and this just final image then is, it's that same neighborhood. This does start to look at kind of the impact of, if we sort of started to imagine, again, it's kind of hypothesizing like maximum development, right? Like, you know, how many places are eligible for it? You know, and under the existing zoning, you know, 28 of these 58 parcels could have ADUs by right. If we remove the owner occupancy clause, that jumps up to 38. You know, and then if we reduced the minimum lot size just to 10,000, I believe it's currently 12 in this neighborhood, this zone. And if you excluded ADUs from the kind of building and lot coverage, you could get that up to 53 out of 58. So pretty dramatically, you know, increasing at least the potential from with respect to the ordinance for development in here. And that's kind of where the project, you know, sits right now. You know, I think the next step in some of this work is trying to continue along this line where we start to actually kind of envision what some of this development could potentially look like as a way to start educating people, you know, provoking a conversation about kind of how these, I mean, particularly the state legislative changes might be implemented, you know, within the neighborhoods and within the town. And so, yeah, that's a kind of quick summary of where we're at on this. I'd be happy to answer questions or discuss or anything.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rob. Okay, who wants to start with some questions? I mean, I'll just jump into the question. Have you been able to reduce this to a list of addresses that you can make available?
We could, yeah. I mean, with the GIS, we could definitely make a list of addresses that are currently eligible by right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Sure. Yep.
Yeah, because in the development subcommittee, one of the strategies we're exploring is what can we do to promote consideration and development of ADUs. I was talking to some banks today. There are definitely banks interested in the market here. And so can we be strategic about disseminating information and reaching out to folks who happen to own those homes?
Yep.
Carol, excuse me, Erica.
I have a couple of questions. So you looked at all of Amherst. There are some small parts of Amherst that have septic systems. How does that impact developing ADUs?
That is a great question. And that's something we talked about. We don't have the data on that to look at it. It would impact it in two ways. Obviously you can't put a ADU. It would limit the space that's available on those parcels to put an ADU. And then two, there's a question of the capacity of those systems. And it's actually, now that you raise that question, it makes me think even more about that we ought to put some attention on these on more central neighborhoods like this where there's municipal plumbing, right? Because that definitely makes a big difference. Yeah.
My second question is, do you know of any municipalities that have actually offered incentives to create ADUs, and what are some of the models?
Yeah, I do. I don't know of anyone in the state right now, which doesn't mean they aren't. The ones I'm familiar with is in Portland, Oregon. They offered some incentives that I think primarily around the fees, reducing the fees that might be involved, which sounds like maybe not much, but I believe in Portland it was actually a fairly substantial amount of, well, like it was enough money that they felt like it made a difference. I know there's some models in some other places where, particularly with respect to affordable housing, that the states have or cities have incentivized, zero interest loans if you're willing to, maintain the ADU as affordable housing for 8 or 10 years. I know that's been tried in LA with some success, and I believe also Austin. So there's definitely some models for that. LA has done another really interesting thing too, and I'm sure they're not the only one. They have a standard plans program where they have a whole bunch of they actually requested these from a whole number of architects, including some fairly famous people. So there's the city now has a whole set of plans for ADUs that are pre-approved. And again, in an effort to sort of facilitate the process, right, and to make it easier as an individual.
Thank you.
Picking up on that last comment, Rob, what features jump to mind in terms of a standard plan that would make sense to go to the lengths of pre-approving in Amherst? What are the features that jump to mind as worth codifying or standardizing?
That's a good question. I mean, I do think there's some question of sizes, right? So, in the current ordinance, you're only allowed to be up to 50% or 1,000 square feet. But we have a lot of houses that are in the sort of 1,000 to 1,500 square foot range. And again, that's something we can pull out pretty quick from this GIS and identify, like, oh, actually, a 600, a 600 square foot unit would be applicable to, X number of parcels in the city. I also think, I don't know how strict, that's a good question. Somebody else might know how strict the design standards are, but I could also see sort of, finding something that, designing something that sort of was accepted as fitting in with the architectural character of the town, also being helpful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rob, there's a question from an attendee if you want to notice or not. I don't know.
Oh, sure. There's Kathleen Anderson. Yeah.
Yes, hi. I am wanting to mention that some of the properties in the Orchard Valley neighborhood that you showed us are wetlands.
Yes. Yeah. I think that little chunk, the chunk that we zoomed in on, doesn't have too much, I don't believe, but yeah, that is definitely another limiting factor in Amherst for a lot of these parcels, right? Is the is the prevalence of wetlands.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
No, I appreciate that. You're right. And in that when we looked at the town as a whole, we did try to pull like at least the places that were identified in the GIS as wetlands as part of that kind of spatial analysis. It's not totally perfect because it gets pretty, it's hard to do it precisely. But we
Yeah,
did try to look at that.
some of the properties in the Orchard Valley neighborhood on the cul-de-sac that you showed us,
Yeah.
behind those houses, the lands are wet when the
Oh,
spring.
really? Okay.
Yeah, in the spring when the river rises, those backyards are like little lakes, little pools of water.
I'll double check that, or I'll have to. Yeah, and it's possible too that places are wet without them being sort of designated as wetlands. At least in the GIS systems. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. That's not insignificant.
Gotcha. And we've got a question from your colleague Ray here. Can I go ahead and maybe
Sure.
I'll promote Ray into a panelist mode if that's sure. Huh? Oh. Well, hopefully Ray's there.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, took a while.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, actually, I mean, Rob sort of answered the question, but I do, we did try to take into account the wetlands because you can see them roughly on GIS, and we did also try to take a survey of trees because that's the other big thing here is a lot of people have mature growth and we don't want to. But again, it is a very kind of rough look at the possibilities. So, but in some ways we were trying to think about like, is there a way to start to automate this? I mean, we did it kind of by hand in a sense, or with fairly minimal GIS programming, but could you actually start to, get a student who's doing AI or something to, be able to run these sort of more detailed analyses of the different conditions? And I do think that if we can use that to be a little more proactive about who might be able to have an opportunity to do this, we thought that'd be interesting. So.
Thank you, Grover.
Do you have like layers of numbers of how many plots based on the state law, given all the considerations, are currently eligible? And then if you had the little orange square, the recommended zoning change, how many more homes would be possibly available? Like, it would be good to get a sense of if we're doing public messaging or if we're considering advocating for a change of the rules, how many potential homes are we talking about? Is it like 20 or is it like 500?
Yep. If I don't have that data, it's something we can get. And actually, if you bear with me for a second, I'll look and see if I started doing some of that, and I honestly can't remember where I landed. But I agree. I think you're right. Like, yeah, that's like a really good, strong argument for the changes to say that, oh, right, like, I mean, just in that neighborhood, right, it's like going from 12,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet. You've almost not doubled, but you've added, 30%.
Right. And if I'm feeling excited about the governor's changes, but then what you're showing me is like, oh, actually still half of that neighborhood or most of that neighborhood is still not ADU eligible, then
Right.
there's a different problem.
Yep.
Yeah,
No,
like-
I think that's interesting too. Like on that, on that first map I was showing, it's like the owner occupancy added 10% to it, right? Not 50%.
Yeah, and a couple of the issues that we saw pretty quickly that'd be worth investigating is this issue of 50% limit on the existing house because, honestly, a 600 square foot unit might be great, but it's, way smaller than what we probably really want to provide, which is maybe, 900, 1,000 square feet. So, we'd love to sort of think about, like, if we tweak this rule, what does it mean if we tweak that rule? And, we think it'd be quite interesting to be able to run those analyses. So we're sort of starting down that road after this initial foray.
Other questions percolating among our group. I mean, it's really exciting that you're reducing this to real numbers. And I understand your concern with, how much more it could be, but, the glass is half full. There's
Sure.
hundreds of possible units right now. And so that's what I think we can keep our eye on and motivate us to try to open some doors to development.
Yeah, agreed. That's definitely the right. That's like actually the right way to look at it. It's like, oh, 50% of the town is eligible for this. That's an awful lot of potential, right? That's hasn't been taken advantage of yet. I do think the geographic distribution of that is interesting too. Because like I said, to me it seems like we want to be where we'd want to promote it most is in some of the areas of the town that are more walkable, and accessible to the schools and town center. And I actually think it's some of the more outlying areas where there's, higher rates of eligibility, just obviously because we get larger building sites out there.
Looks like we got one more question from Kathleen. Go ahead. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Okay, I wasn't unmuted. I didn't get the unmuted signal yet.
Well, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so the ADUs are at the discretion of the homeowners, correct? So although my lot may be eligible for an ADU, I don't have to build one.
Well, of course not. No.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to, for anybody else who might be listening, that's clear that they're not required to build it, but if they wanted to and their lot qualifies, they can.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the next layer of work that we can do is try to see who are the owners for whom this would make a lot of sense. And what can we do to facilitate this given their very specific situations.
Yeah, one thing we were inspired by is there's a group, I don't know if you might know, Russell Wallach, who is very interested in chestnut agroforestry, and he's very skilled in GIS, and he was able to do an analysis of all the soils and properties actually nationwide, and then he would approach people, there are like ideal circumstances for chestnut agroforestry. So he would actually approach owners with the proposal that they either lease part of their land or are encouraged to start agroforestry. So it's an interesting inversion in the kind of usual course of action where you sort of randomly wait for people to have an idea, but a little more proactive in pointing out an opportunity. And we thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I will say from my research, our research, more broadly, I do think that the financing piece is another major hurdle. And so it's good to hear that some local banks are getting interested in understanding how ADUs could be valued, because in a lot of places, it's hard to get the financing for them. So they often end up, it's like the only people that can do it are people who can self-fund it.
Yes. So, I've got a meeting with Lighthouse, which is based in New Hampshire, but has just received approval to lend in Massachusetts. I talked with someone from Cape Cod 5 who can't lend this way, but is very willing to speak to us about their experience on the Cape, which, the pressure on the Cape with tourism is somewhat parallel to the pressure that we experience from students.
Sure.
And one of the things that we also were looking in our to-do list was, we know that the cost of the kind of the building is one thing, but it's also all the other costs of like, extending the sewer line and gas line or what have you. And those are often sort of the unforeseen expenses that can really blow a project up. And so is there a way to kind of assess also, because we have so much data here in this town, kind of like a kind of difficulty factor in addition to putting the unit itself? Is it a very steeply sloped site, or so could you help people anticipate kind of these potential issues? And then if there's an incentive, one could develop an incentive program to help balance that somehow.
Indeed, and I guess that touches back on the idea of the kind of pre-approved design that might standardize some of those expenses, and then also what can we do to learn from the number of ADUs that have been built in Amherst already. I assume we've got records of those, but can we do some outreach to those owner developers to find out about their experience? All right. Well, this visit has been super productive. Last chance for any questions. Why don't we cut it short here so that we can maybe do a part 2 or 3 in the future.
Sure.
Ray and Rob, really delightful to have you join us and help us out here.
Absolutely. No, it's our pleasure, and definitely, and keep us in the loop, because I mean our hope in doing this work is that we can have an impact in the town and the region. So I think if you all have ideas on other things that would help support these kinds of initiatives, and housing issues in the town, we're really interested in continuing to work on that or contributing to that work. So
Excellent.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks
so
a
much.
lot. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Ray.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I'm excited to meet with Grover and Carol and Greg on Monday to we can kind of run with some of these ideas and see what might be next. So unless we want to do any reflection on that conversation, why don't we go ahead and move to the next topic, which we began to discuss at our last meeting, and that is a proposal from the Community Action Tenancy Preservation. And Greg, can you set us up here?
Sure. So as a reminder, we talked in vague terms, not naming the organization. I can now share, as you've all seen, that this is a request from Community Action in sort of informal partnership with Family Outreach of Amherst, which is a CHD program, but long time, I think, even preceding their association with CHD, based here in Amherst. The basic background of this is, it is that Community Action observed an increase of inquiries from residents of Amherst, roughly correlating with the expiration of Amherst's ARPA program, which was not through the trust, but was Amherst had a number of ARPA programs, including one that was aimed at folks requiring support for rental arrears or utility arrears. So and those funds, were, I think, exhausted in the summertime, and around that time is when Community Action started noticing more calls from Amherst. So we kind of brought it to you all conceptually last month, and you all kind of told me to ask them for something more formal, which you all received in your packet as far as a proposal of what they would seek to do. But basically the model here is filling in gaps that they observe in what the state provides, which is something called RAFT. RAFT offers more substantial sums than they would offer here by in some cases a significant amount, but RAFT is less useful in a number of sort of niche circumstances, including, ironically, folks who are in some sort of subsidized apartment, whether a tax credit or with a voucher or whatever. RAFT looks less favorably on helping in those scenarios. I don't know what percentage of folks community actions working with fit this profile, but some folks may have seen an article in Mass Live a couple of days ago about people living in affordable housing units and tax credit units who were nonetheless cost burdened. And how this happens is perhaps somebody who's in a unit pegged for 60% of AMI, but maybe they only make 40% of AMI. They're still below the income ceiling, but the rent is pegged at 60. Ergo, they're going to be cost burdened. And there was some reflections from folks like that in that article. This is an example of one type of household that might benefit from what community action is doing. I should note too that they're already running this program regionally, and they do it with at the moment with fundraised money. But that if we were to slot in resources, they would be reserved, obviously, for folks who are Amherst residents. And the basic idea here is preventing eviction and preserving folks' ability to live in Amherst. We hear from most partners in the community that if somebody goes through an eviction, it's incredibly rare that they're able to maintain a residence in Amherst. Usually they end up someplace else. And so that's maybe a quick nutshell. I don't know if I can fill in any specific details, Gaston or anybody.
Yeah, why don't we get some questions? Grover, please.
It didn't see clearly stated, and apologies if I missed it. It was a very wordy document, but is this request for a one-time fund? Because it said they would report on a quarterly basis. Is that through the course of a year, or do they expect it to be ongoing?
They're not requesting multiple tranches of money. I mean, I think what the request is for $18,000, I think, at one time, and they are open to our feedback on. They think they could spend it in a shorter period of time, or they could stretch it out a little bit. And I had asked them basically because this is kind of outside of our application framework, for how we do capital investment. I sort of came up with some quick criteria for how they might throw together a fairly low resource 1 or 2 page document. And among the things I asked them for was to just note their ability, their existing reporting capacity, that they could plug this into. And I think that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah, Carol, please.
I have a bigger question that has been growing. We did Craig's Doors, and that at least got people to have a permanent shelter. But especially coming off of what we just heard about what might be possible with ADUs, I'm concerned about doing things that are kind of stopgap for the person that's in the house right now. I'm concerned about how much of our resources we put into that. I look at our plan that we just made. It doesn't say anything about that, really. It wants us to make units. And I'm not saying the need is not great. I know the need is great. There is no question about that. But I feel like we may be one thing that is kind of uniquely positioned to be able to do something about more units, and just helping the people who are in the units that they're in now. And I don't have an answer. I'm concerned to see us seem to go in this kind of a direction. Right at the beginning of a process, we're trying to figure out ways to do some things that are more creative. And we just heard about one that's kind of exciting. If we were able to put together, here's where you can get financing, here's some incentives, here's some ways to do this, and go knocking on doors like we did trying to get people to put solar panels on their roofs, knocking on doors at the places that seems like this could happen and say, look, here's all this stuff. Try and do this. There's these incentives. What if we could do that stuff? But that's going to cost money too. So I am just, that's it. I'm concerned on that kind of a level, not about this particular thing in a way, but I will now stop talking.
Good. No, thank you for kind of reaffirming the big picture question of our mission and focus. Allegra, please.
I definitely understand like the concern about what our plan that we just put together was and is and what we're trying to focus on. And I also think it's useless to have all these units if people can't stay in them. Like, but I get and that is, I'm not necessarily saying yay or nay immediately, but my question, and I think this was in there and I can't remember, is this a program that would only address people post like receiving a 14-day notice to quit? So like when the eviction proceedings have actually started, or is this just anyone who starts to fall behind on their rent might be eligible? Or did they specify?
Yeah, Greg, are you clear about Allegra's question?
So I have to review the document. You know, I don't know if they told me precisely what their juncture for action is. Raft, I'm fairly sure, requires a 14-day notice to quit. But what, you know, one wrinkle of this is that they would require, I think, most households for rental arrears to go to Raft first, which is their policy currently, and for some, you know, it can be a challenge, but they can get them on the back end if Raft doesn't work out for rental arrears. In fact, it's utility arrears that are more challenging in that generally when you get a shutoff notice, it's within 2 weeks, and Raft in Hampshire County cannot act within 2 weeks. In the case of, it was rental arrears, they'd push people to Raft and then and support them in that process, and then come, you know, and then have resources available if not. And utility arrears that they act more immediately though.
So just to like think about how it could potentially tie into what our big picture idea is I think that it could be potentially helpful as part of the education committee. Maybe having not a building of affordable housing 101 like we are also talking about, but actually like these are your rights and responsibilities as a tenant type workshop, because I do think, having worked in the field of eviction prevention, people get really scared when they get a 14-day notice to quit, which is a really scary thing, but it also doesn't mean that you actually have to be out of your house in 14 days. There is a whole court process that has to be gone through, and tenants have a lot of rights in this state. So perhaps if we were to consider this proposal, we could potentially go back to the agency and say, you know what, we like the idea, we want to give some money, but we also want to have some education for tenants, you know, as a caveat to us giving money, and we can work with somebody to arrange something like that. It was a big idea that I just had that it came out really disjointed, but just thinking if we wanted to try and tie it into our plan, maybe that is a way that we could do that.
Very, very good idea of linking it to be ancillary to our mission and strategy. Alex, please.
I'd actually like to hear from our town manager first.
Okay. Paul?
Yeah, so I have sort of three things. One is I think this is a very real problem, and I think it's going to get worse as the governor starts to pull back from funding homeless services, and I think we're going to see shrinkage in the number of beds available. So I think it's going to cascade in terms of if people are evicted, and then there's no place for them to stay. So that means there is urgency, I think. I also agree with Carol in that we didn't articulate this as a goal. And that's how good is our process if whoever walks in the door next says, and we suddenly look at the next shiny thing. It's like, this is great. And that leads me to the third thing, which is, I've said this before, that I don't like our sort of, whoever walks in, asks money, we almost always say yes. There's no comparative analysis done by where should we put our limited funds. We have lots of funds, but it's limited. And where are we putting them? We've tried to do that through our strategic planning, but we haven't done that through, we have a grant opening period. We're welcoming times for people to come forward. So I struggle with this one, quite honestly, because I think the need is very real. I think the work we did with family outreach at Amherst during COVID was successful, and they were able to do like utility bills and things like that. But I really sort of think the trust, we should think about what our mission is and by our strategic plan.
Thank you, Paul. Alex.
Yeah, I had a more specific question about the proposal that we have in front of us, and maybe somebody read this differently in a way that makes sense. But when they detailed their $18,000 request, they then said they wanted to help the 10 and the 15 families and gave maximum amounts for those awards that in total equaled the $18,000. And then at the end said that they would also need a 15% administrative fee on top of that, which concerned me because that means they can't actually give that maximum award to all of the families that applied. So I was confused if they were asking for the 18,000 plus 15%, so actually 20,700, or if they were reducing the amount of the awards that they were discussing.
Okay, yeah. Greg, do you want to respond to that point directly?
Yeah, and I'm reviewing the specifics, and I think, Alex, that, and without being able to do the math quickly, but I think probably the inherent assumption in this is that not every payment is going to hit the ceiling of 600 and 800. Does your math presume everything was at the high numbers of 600 and 800?
I did assume that, yeah, because that's how I interpreted their application.
So yeah, so I guess in fact, because some of these folks, might be voucher holders, for example, so their actual cash rent and the amount of arrears might be like quite modest, $600, something like that. So in some cases, some of these payments wouldn't actually hit the maximum of 900 in the case of rent, or 600 in the case of utilities. So I assume that's,
well, just on the math. I mean, 1530 times 10, and then 15%. I think we're at the 18,000 or so. We can check here, but I think if we're looking at, if it's 900 plus 600 times 10, then the numbers are in the right ballpark. Erica?
Well, I had that question too, so I'm glad, Alex, you raised it. But I also want to state that when we discussed our action plan, we actually had a discussion about, does that preclude any other action? And I think what we said is, it depends what the request or what that action is. So I think, our action plan is important, and I agree that this is our guiding tool, but I don't think we should be inflexible. And I agree with you, Paul, around the urgency. I think, and I actually agree with Allegra in terms of her innovative thinking, in terms of that maybe we can utilize this as an opportunity to do education and try to do some preventive work. But $18,000 in helping families not be evicted, if there were 10 and 15, that's 25 families in Amherst, especially after reading the housing production plan assessment in terms of people who are extremely burdened, low income families, and the impact that that COVID still can have on these individuals and families. I think it's really important to think about keeping families in Amherst. And if we can do that, I think that's critical, and trying to then again think about more prevention. But 18,000, I'm trying to think about how much the interfaith group gave to us. And if that's an opportunity to use it, because I'm sure that interfaith group might think that this urgency, this would be one of those exceptions to not having met our action plan for the future. So I really want to think about the fact that we could keep 25 families in Amherst.
And Erica, picking up on your comment about where we might source the funds, one question is, or less a question, I guess one point is that the funds that would seem appropriate for this are the unrestricted funds that didn't come from the CPA, and so indeed that's one of those sources around the corner that indeed we could kind of peg to this use of funds. Grover.
It's more of a thinking out loud comment consideration is I very much feel the like urgency around X number of families who this could be used for, and also agree with Paul that it's likely to grow more and more and more, and the stakes of a family being pushed out of housing are really high. And at the same time, when I was reading the description from Community Action, a question that kept coming up is like, what is going to keep these families from not having the same problem in 3 months with their utility bill or with their rent costing too much? And I know that's a big existential question, but 18,000 seems like in some ways so little to actually solve the problem. And also, I know Community Action is a large organization, and a lot of the funds that they're trying to rely on, like so much of the description was like, we have these buckets of money from state and federal governments and they don't work. It's like what I was reading, and like, we need you to work because these buckets of money aren't actually working. And so that doesn't necessarily inform how I might vote on this, but just noting that out loud of like what this one housing trust in this town that is not so large is asking to shoulder in terms of the fiscal systems that are supposed to work to keep these families housed. And also that like Community Action has a $30 million budget. And so not that they need to use their operating budget to scoop families out, but also at the same time, you know, the 15% transfer fee, right? Like these things is like, they also have access to a lot of resourcing that maybe other entities that are going to come to us might not have. So I'm just noting those things out loud about the specific requests. Yeah.
Okay. We haven't heard from you, Rob. I haven't exactly weighed in. I guess I don't know, Rob, do you have a comment you'd like to make? I'll make a comment as well.
Just to say that I'm not really troubled by ad hoc requests. In fact, that's what we tell CPA. We need the money so that we can respond to ad hoc requests.
Yeah.
Oh, but people have raised some interesting issues, and I'm really sure.
Yeah. I guess picking up on that and kind of following up on Paul's comment. We don't have a formal process. We don't have application windows, and maybe at a certain point we'll need that. In the absence of that, there's kind of no better marker of need than someone coming to us and presenting us a need. And so I think there's a certain kind of method in the ad hoc method that is, information revealing. It's revealing the present need, and we have to evaluate whether we see it as such. Greg.
Yeah, I just want to offer a couple clarifying comments in response to the first part of what Grover shared, really asked, I think. was around sustainability and what's going to happen to these families after resolution. Part of the dynamic here is that family outreach doesn't want to be involved financially in this; they're not able to, but they were part of the sort of inciting discussion here, and would play a role in follow up with any families that access these resources. So Community Action's kind of committed to partnering with them, as I understand they do already. And the other thing to the resource question is that, at least as it was pitched to me, that this would open up folks to other resources at Community Action, that they might not know about. So, it is generally within their practice, like, hey, if you're, you have a rental arrears issue, oh, you're probably eligible for WIC. You're probably, you might be eligible for some heating assistance. Can we help you access that, et cetera, et cetera. So that I think speaks a little bit to some of the, I think you used the term sustainability, or maybe I did, but I just wanted to sort of insert that in response to your thoughts.
Yeah, Allegra.
I thought that I'd heard the other day, and I don't remember where, but I thought I'd heard that Raft was exhausted at this point, and I don't know if that is true or accurate, or.
I don't think Raft is exhausted. I don't think that it works that way. I mean, I think they just keep funding it. There might have been something else that, I think there's emergency shelter money that is more, that, where resources run out. I think they keep funding Raft, though, if I'm not mistaken.
Their website continues to take applications, if that tells us anything.
Maybe it was a specific case that they had exhausted their award for, and I just.
But I have heard, directly from Community Action and kind of maybe more informally from others, that there are sort of contours in how accommodating or non-accommodating Raft is. And it's unclear at what, because basically applications come through regional agencies and then go to the state. Who really knows where the filter is? But Kate Shapiro of Community Action suggested that they'd observed in recent, months, what feels like a higher bar to clear at Raft.
Carol.
Guess my question's if
You're a little soft. Maybe can you bring down your mic? Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Good idea. If we were to do this, then I guess I would want to know more about how it actually is going to happen. Or I guess what I want to know is, if somebody does whatever they're supposed to do to get this, and it's not quite clear from all of this what the requirements would be, that in fact, with the money goes exactly what we've all been talking about, the support, so that hopefully you can do things so that this doesn't happen again, or at least whatever the support there is available. And I was also curious that they have a number of families they think they can help for this money. And there's not exactly, I don't know if they have a time frame in mind, or if we would want to have a time frame in mind. And do we just, will they just get, here is $18,000, tell us when you get done with all the families, or will they kind of the way it happened with, or will they show, there's just a lot of detailed questions that I don't feel like I know the answer to. And the most important one for me probably is that if this goes forward, then there is a clear understanding that the people who get this support, this financial support, will also be getting all the kind of other support that family outreach and Community Action and whoever else needs to be involved can provide them.
So let's assume that we could, be in a position to make some more requests or specify a few details, but bracketing that where are we right now on whether we're inclined as a trust to apply some of our unrestricted funds, of which we do expect this other money to be coming in shortly. It's that was on the order of $40,000. Greg, is that right?
That's the expectation from Interfaith Amherst.
Yeah. So are we inclined to apply some unrestricted funds to this need and organization? Carol.
Oh, that just leads me to the financial question of, I don't remember when the last time we got a financial statement, and I'd love to see whatever the most recent one is. And then we know, okay, $40,000 is maybe coming in and whatever else we know, but it would just be nice to know where we actually are sitting as we decide to do this.
Nate actually submitted one to all of us. I think, was it not in the packet?
I don't think I saw it, but that might be just, I don't know. I might have missed it. That's quite possible, especially lately.
It was not in the packet, but he replied kind of immediately with it, and I can share that.
Share that, yeah.
Yeah. So bear with.
I have in a PDF if that would be useful.
I got it.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah. Let me zoom here. Oh, how much? How's that? So in the interest of folks seeing, pardon, not the most ideal Zoom situation. So the actual overall balance right now, minus commitments we've already made, but still remain on the books with the town. So subtracting those items which are committed, we're at 114 and change of development funds. And then some other balances, up here we have this one here is sorry, I'm going to zoom back over, is unrestricted resources, fairly modest. That is that comes from some original gifts that we received, I think, when the trust launched. And this is where we would put the incoming interfaith gift, which we expect to be around $40,000. But we should, not, count our chickens, so to speak. This is just interest resources. And then I'm not quite sure the provenance of the smaller line here. But then this is how we pay yours truly, and then the development line down here. But again, this balance is actually 114 minus our commitments to Ball Lane.
Thank you.
Eric, please.
It says that for the development funds, 2 times $375,000. I think it was actually 350 and 375, not 2 times. So that's $25,000, a little bit more that we should have. But
that's that's correct, and that's math. And yeah, you're right. That's and Nate produces these out of like a complex accounting system that spits out an unreadable Excel, and then he formats it into this. That does not show these two amounts from what he's looking at. So I think this is probably just from his head. Eric, I think you are correct.
Yep. So that's $25,000 more than
in this development line, though. And I think we're probably talking
exactly. That's right. It's not unrestricted, but and then 40,000 on top of the unrestricted would be now 65,000 on that unrestricted line. So
once we have the interface
right.
stuff. But yeah, I mean, I was told probably January, but we're waiting on the Attorney General's office. Not something where we're going to be able to call and say, "Hey, cut that check." So I certainly wouldn't, write that money critically into our plan, in the next 2 months or something like that.
Yep. And the other question I have is if you move it a little bit to the left, the line that says the one with the contracts. Where was it?
Consulting.
Yeah, there's one there that said something with contracts. What is that? Encumbrance and contracts, 3,072 and 80 cents under, yeah, technical assistance.
Erica, I do not know, to be honest.
Did we
You know, I
pay
think
Shelley?
no, we did not pay Shelley.
Right.
I wonder, and Paul, you might know, perhaps this is an accounting line or something like that for how we account for the town's management of the trust's books. But this number has never been high, so I honestly haven't. Oh, I see. It's under encumbrances though.
Yeah,
Right.
contracts.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
was looking at the left here.
I thought at some point Nate said he thought that those things were done and it could be released, but it hadn't happened because of it takes some accounting thing to release it, but that it could be.
That
It's
sounds
worth
right.
looking into because I'm not positive of that. And it is, and if it could be released, then let's get it released and not have it sitting there like that. And if it is really for something, then let's know what it's for.
Okay, so I was looking left and not up. You know, my suspicion is probably that the trust may have been contracted with, you know, an outside person kind of doing what I'm doing now, and maybe that person didn't bill all the way to what
Rita, wasn't her name Rita? All right.
Or something along those lines. That's what I'm guessing. But yeah, I can look into that.
Thank you.
Greg, a question, given that they contemplated quarterly reporting, would it be a reasonable step to break the request down and basically admit that we're not in a position to kind of give the full amount, assuming that we all wanted to, even if we all wanted to, it's kind of cutting our funds tight, and that we would be more comfortable kind of giving a quarterly amount, so to speak, of the request.
I think if we committed to the whole thing and, you know, to funding their whole request and said we'd like to pay it out in, you know, whatever, in $4,500 increments or whatever that is, you know, I think I doubt they'd have concerns there, but not conditional. But I think we would have to probably commit to the. I don't think we could put in, you know, reporting obligations or whatever that, you know, that we've predicated the release of money onto for at this level, right? I don't think it'd be worth it for them. Yeah.
Okay.
Wouldn't that be more of an administrative burden for the town, though, in terms of quarterly?
Yeah, it'd be easier to just cut one check.
All right, we've seen our piggy bank. We've I think explored this issue in some depth, and so we're in a position to kind of express our views, move one way or the other, or be stuck.
I move to authorize $18,000 for EV action.
Okay. Did you frame that as a motion, Rob? I didn't hear the first word. Yeah. Okay. So we've got a motion. We've got a motion on the table. Any discussion? Allegra?
So one thing I'm thinking about is that if we are talking about this money is being requested to go to people who might already have subsidies or might be struggling to pay a utilities bill, my guess is that that would put them in kind of one of the lower income brackets in terms of the town, you know, in terms of socioeconomic status in town. If they're qualifying for a subsidy. So I think, I mean, I'm just looking at some of the housing production plan data and seeing how much of this town is actually overburdened in terms of housing costs. And I would wager that that includes people who have subsidies, since it goes off your gross income, not your, what you're actually taking home. I just think that if we're, you know, thinking about like little a and big A affordable, like we have people in quote unquote affordable and subsidized housing that still aren't even making ends meet. And I think that if there are small buckets, if it's a smaller bucket that can help save a tenancy or help pay a utility bill so that rent can be paid, I think that we would be doing a disservice not to provide funding for that. Even if it's a large agency that has a huge budget, and maybe some nefarious pots of money, or maybe they're not nefarious, but we're just unsure what other pots of money there are. I just think, again, maybe it's because I'm looking at it as a social worker and I think of like people first and like the people that we might actually be helping versus like a building that we might be supporting. I just think that this would be one of the most at-risk populations to serve. And again, I mean, I got an email yesterday from Craig's Doors saying they're asking for money for motel vouchers again, because they're concerned about shelter space and funding for housing. So I think that there would be a big trickle effect of evictions, and homelessness might look different than it did last year at this point because of what resources are available. And so those would be my concerns, and I think my reasons for voting yes, even if it's not necessarily outlined in our bigger plan, but perhaps in going back to them, if we do approve it, we could talk about also, can we do some community education? So that would be my.
Okay, good. So the call is very strong, and we're here to serve people, not buildings, even if buildings is how we serve people. Carol.
Both.
I just want assurance that, I mean, Rob's motion says $18,000, and I want to know that that isn't $18,000 plus 15%. I want assurance that that's the whole ball of wax. They get their 15% out of that.
Okay, well, if that's what we're moving to approve, then that's what we are approving. Other discussion. So we have a motion on the table and we're discussing this motion. Alex, please.
I think Greg's hand was first.
Oh,
so yeah, I just caught a thing in their proposal actually. Nobody else may have noticed, but I think it is relevant to what Allegra just raised, which is the income ceiling we're talking about here. I believe that's a typo in their proposal. They wrote 200% AMI. Community action serves folks at 200% of the federal poverty level, which is considerably lower. Probably like 50-55% of AMI is probably more what that relates to. So yes, that we are talking about very low income people, who would be beneficiaries of this.
Okay, Alex.
Okay, yeah, kind of just talking as I'm thinking here, because I'm genuinely really struggling with this. I agree with everything that Allegra said, that this feels like it is really important to our mission to help people remain housed. I do think it's interesting that unless I just missed it in the proposal, the justification for that specific amount, the 15 Amherst residents with utility arrears and the 10 with rent arrears doesn't seem to necessarily be coming from anywhere. Like in their proposal, they say they think that there's a need, they believe that there's a need. But it's also a lot of our like non-restricted funds that we're talking about. So I guess my gut is that I would support this in this smaller amount, but I think that 18,000 is high, especially when we're not quite sure from a couple of possibly mistakes in their application what their administrative fee is coming out of and what their actual awards that they're looking to give out are.
Yeah, America.
And it may be that I overread it, but I thought they had talked about the number of calls that they've ever gotten from Amherst residents, and I think they extrapolated from the calls that they've gotten already from Amherst residents in the past year, and that's what they were sort of extrapolating from for those 10 and 15 individuals. But I might have overthought it in my wanting to help.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Grover.
Just note that, in my opinion, $18,000 is actually a pretty low number. And considering that the 40,000 is about to come in from the Interfaith Coalition, I'm inclined to support it. And also because 18,000, when we think about the cost of doing homeless services for even one family or one person is much more than 18,000 just for one. So preventing potential homelessness in a dozen folks, that's a pretty good return on the numbers. So that's the approach I'm taking at this point.
Okay, I think we've had a good discussion. If there's other points, we will hear them. But otherwise, why don't we proceed to a vote on the motion on the table, which is to approve the request for $18,000. I'll go around the room here that I'm seeing. Erica?
Yes.
Paul?
I'll vote no.
Okay. Alex?
I'm voting no.
Allegra?
Yes.
Grover?
Yes.
Carol?
Ugh.
Buck is not a
I'm
vote,
gonna
Carol.
abstain. I know it's not. I don't know what to say. So maybe I'll just abstain, but I hate that idea. So no, I'll vote no.
Okay. Rob?
Yes.
Okay. And I will vote yes. And so I think we have approved this by a vote of 4-3. If my math is correct.
I believe it was 5-3.
5-3. 1, 2. Okay. Okay. Well, it's good that we have rich conversation and we're not afraid to disagree, because then we can actually take on hard things and deal with them honestly. So I appreciate everyone's candor and the quality of the process. So moving on to the next item on our agenda, we have got the shall we skip to town updates, Greg?
Sure, that sounds great. And we're at 8:25 here. So town updates. The housing production plan continues apace. I think first, we looked at the needs assessment a little bit last month, and Nate, myself, and Nate, and a couple other colleagues in the planning department have been kind of offering fairly comprehensive feedback on that document. And I'll just highlight, after further absorption, kind of where we all landed, as we are directing Barrett to develop a bit more articulation and conclusions from some of the data they present. Specifically, for example, like looking at, cost burden data we talked about today. What does that cost burden data imply as far as what we should do? How many units might we need in an ideal world for some subset of people who are of low income in our town? Questions like that, encouraging them to sort of boost those conclusions or include them where they're entirely missing. Another example is, there's this section on barriers in the needs assessment that includes things like zoning or natural barriers or whatever. Kind of along the lines of what we heard from Rob Williams earlier, we have zoning issue X or Y, and we're asking Barrett to kind of put in the conclusion. And so we should do Z to resolve X and Y, things like that. So that's kind of the tenor of the feedback we're getting to them, along with some language and, just general communication, more granular things. But if folks want to offer additional feedback just on the needs assessment portion of that, this week would be ideal. I don't know if anybody has specific questions right now regarding the needs assessment or anything anybody else wants to raise regarding that document. It's okay if not. It's a little bit weedy, and we're hoping to make it a little less weedy. Go ahead, Erica.
It's just very minor, but some of the graphics, especially the GIS pieces, I know it's a map of Amherst, but there is no thing to reference where these pieces are. Yeah. So to help a little bit, I think the young man today did it well, where he actually showed where this was in context to the rest of Amherst. Otherwise, it sort of becomes meaningless looking at it.
Yeah, that was a really spectacular graphic that Rob Williams had actually with the central Amherst. I love the trees. But yeah, and that's we've also asked us more graphics, more pictures, just a bit prettier. And I think they're hearing that. So that's kind of the needs assessment. And then a piece which is technically also part of the needs assessment is the survey. And I owe some number of people thanks for spreading that around. We finished our survey with 326 or 7 complete responses, and then about 420 something total responses, which I'm super pleased with. As far as volume, I pushed that a lot to all of you, and we got a lot of help from the town manager's office. Thank you, Paul, Sam, Giffen, our communications, forgetting her title right now, but she runs communications for the town, and she did a lot of great work in pushing this both to the press and on social media. And we did some direct outreach as well. We had partners like Family Outreach doing that work, with colleagues. I was at the Survival Center on Friday, so we really kind of got it out there. We're going to hopefully tease from that for some press outreach for our January 7th community meeting, which is coming up. That's going to be more focused on goals, kind of emerging from what they've learned from the needs assessment. And that will be more of a drop-in format between 4 and 6:30. So it's not required to be there the whole time. There'll be interactives and sort of graphics around to respond to and that sort of thing. We will then have a trust meeting 2 days later, which will, I think we should probably also drill in on goals. I would say it would be beneficial, if at all possible, for at least some members of the trust to join us on the 7th to sort of get a taste of what's there. And then I'm guessing we can have a more sophisticated conversation on the 9th, just because we're a narrower group and a bit more steeped in some of this stuff. Yeah, and then I'll just tease one going back to our previous presentation. This was kind of outside of most of what we asked in this survey, but of those 327 responses, 30 people said they were interested in potentially exploring the possibility of an ADU in their home. And the biggest obstacle they noted was financial. I thought that's some interesting data. So yeah, Alex, the question.
Yeah, sorry, taking one step back, it took me a moment to pull up my
Sorry.
notes on the if we have feedback on the draft housing needs assessment, would you prefer that over email or no?
I mean, I would say if it's nitty gritty details over email, but if it's more of a bigger picture question, I think now is a great time.
Okay, I'll send some over email, but one larger one now. They talk in only one place that I saw in the document. They talk about the purchase of single family homes by investors to be converted to student rentals. They talk about it as an interview response, but then never revisit if they actually find data to support that that's happening or not. I know that that's a big lift, that it can be hard to wade through sale records and property parcel data. But if we could at least kind of get some idea on if there's evidence of that happening in recent years or not, I think that'd be helpful because it comes up in town discussions a lot. But I've also never seen anybody be able to produce evidence that it is or is not happening.
Well, one fairly indicative evidence of it's happening is when LLCs are buying single family homes, and every week in the Gazette there's a report of sales, and that's available to them, and they can obviously go to the source of that data, but that's a pretty good indicator of the companies. And I can tell you that I get emails all the time from companies wanting to buy my house.
Yeah, and they have assessors data from the town. Barrett does, so I'm guessing they have something. How hard the drilling is, I could not tell you, but I can certainly ask for that. I agree. I think that'd be a very valuable data point to boost.
Greg, can you remind us the details of that January 7th event?
Sure. So that'll be the Tuesday, January 7th, between 4 and 6:30. Drop in as you will. We'll have some pizza and some graphics, and kind of summarizing some of these data conclusions. It'll be in the Woodbury room in the Jones Library, which is the one downstairs, and that's open to the public. That's a public meeting. So among my task list tomorrow is to start hashing out sharing out the flyer that I got today. So,
okay. I will not be able to get there. I can, unfortunately. Erica.
I just want to tell you, Greg, the DEI department does a monthly newsletter. That would be great to put it in that monthly newsletter to get as many diverse members of our community to come and talk.
Yeah. Thank you. I didn't actually know they did that. So yeah, and then the other thing, there's some limitations around census data, both just based on what the census collects officially, and then also the fact that our most recent census was particularly wonky in Amherst in that it was from April 2020. So we're overcoming some, where we can overcoming, and where we're not, we're dealing with some challenges there. But one thing, I've also directed them to do is to sort of hone in a little bit more on need, both in town and in the region. So they'll be trying to gather some waitlist data to sort of articulate that need a little more clearly, and also boost. There's one table in there around TANF and food stamp eligibility, which is a pretty good proxy for low-income families in town, but it's kind of graphically and doesn't quite pop quite as much as it needs to. So things like that, we're asking for, a little more, usage of graphic design to highlight some of those things. So that's kind of what I got for the HPP right now. But so like I said, on the 7th, we'll start embarking on developing goals, and then and then in early February, we'll do a session drilling a bit more into strategies, and there will also be opportunities to weigh in on both of those in these meetings. It's my hope that this group can take a pretty good swing at goals and strategies, as a part of that. I think that's a key role the trust can play. So look forward to that in January. And at our regular meeting. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the public meeting. And then popping over to other town updates. So the wayfinders on Project East Street Road, or East Street and Belchertown Road, remains before the ZBA, and it's just, I guess, kind of just slowing down. They're through the lion's share of things, as I understand it. I did ask today if it is expected that they'll have a comprehensive permit in time to apply in this round with the state, and I was told yes. But I think that is a thing for ZBA watchers to pay attention to, is making sure that the ZBA approves a comprehensive permit, beating the deadline for wayfinders to then go to the state for funding. So we are getting a little closer to that. I'm not ringing an alarm bell yet, but I'm going to pay attention to that next week. I kind of learned about that crunch today. So if there are major concerns there, I'll consult with Gaston and we'll go from there. So that's the wayfinders effort, but the ZBA is, I understand, through all the big questions about what the building looks like, and the lot coverage and all those nitty gritty details. It's more about management plans and this sort of thing now into the programmatic weeds. The overlay, the University Drive housing overlay, continues apace. And again, I learned today that we think it looks like it will get approved in some fashion. It's just a question of how much continued dialogue there is, and B, how much just additional little complications get added to it. I think that's kind of still unclear. The interesting dynamic there is that the overlay, we hope, will do one thing, but the market will do other things too. And we learned recently that probably the building that precedes the overlay, that just went through the ZBA on the corner of University and Amity, I sent you all an inquiry around them adding a story, and now they're taking that away because of the price of steel, I'm told, or something along those lines. So, things fluctuate, and these things are complicated. So that's just a interesting wrinkle. But that's not passed yet. And then finally, going back to ADUs, actually, the planning board did take a look at the ADU or bylaw in order to match it with the state one, and did propose to add a fairly exotic wrinkle of identifying a new use of a student home, which they defined, echoing something in Pennsylvania, I think. Basically, a day or two later, the state produced regulations, or based on the previously passed legislation, which looked to prohibit what the planning board passed. So that probably won't go very far. But it was interesting that they did do that, but the overlay is not passed yet. But so I think, other than that, my understanding is the ADU bylaw didn't have much exotic that the planning board has. I don't actually know if they've officially voted on the whole thing yet, or just that piece of it. But perhaps there's a window, based on what Rob shared, to in the future come at some more comprehensive stuff based on lot coverage, etc. As far as town updates, I believe that is what I've got. Yep. So I think we're into subcommittees. Unless Eric, you had a question?
Yes, regarding a town update, and maybe Paul, you can respond, or Greg, you can find out the answer to this. So my understanding through the Amherst Bulletin is that it looks like our town is going to be building a firehouse on Hickory Ridge, which is wonderful because I know it's been in the works and there's a need for South Amherst to have it. But does that preclude any other housing development, since we, for a very long period of time, had discussed while John was still here, senior housing, the possibility of creating senior housing on that property?
No, there'd be room for that. I mean, there've been a lot of different proposals for use of the land beyond, affordable housing, senior housing, youth empowerment center, senior center. So there's a lot of, but the highest priority for the town, at least from the town council, as they've articulated, is a new fire station. We're looking at the path of least resistance for creating a fire station. This one meets our needs. We already own the parcel, which is a major barrier typically. So that's up for the council to make a decision whether they would like us to start working on plans for that site. And so they're still in that consideration of that process, but it wouldn't take the entire site. But you will see the clubhouse coming down in the next few weeks. So the contract for that has been let. And then you'll get to see that really the extent of the parcel that is buildable there more easily, I think.
Thanks, Paul. And I'll note as well, too, one thing, we are going to try again with doing something similar to what we did with the VFW, with a brief engagement with either an architect or development team on the other South Amherst school site, to sort of do a short-term sort of feasibility effort there. So that's, we did release a seeking written quotes request and didn't get responses to it, unfortunately. So we're going to try again in January and try and get that going.
Okay, well, I think we're up to get some micro updates from any committees that have met since we last met as a full group. Our development group, as I mentioned earlier, will be meeting Monday, so we don't have anything new as of yet. But other subcommittees, would you like to share anything out?
So the education committee met, and I don't recall if last meeting we talked about actually signing on as a co-sponsor to the January 23rd event that we have been talking about with the League of Women Voters. Did we approve that last?
I think we might have talked about it, but I don't think we voted. So it would be good to do that now if
so there is, in the packet, there was a flyer. I think there are some word changes, but basically it's going to be constructing affordable housing in Amherst from 7 to 9 on January 23rd. It will be a hybrid event taking place in the town room or on Zoom. We will have Laura Baker, Tom Kiegelman, Keith Ferry, and John Hornick as panelists, and then Mindy Dom and Gaston will co-facilitate a discussion. And I will also give a little blurb about the trust and the work that we're doing. So that is the main thing that I think we've focused on, other than the wonderful little elevator pitch that Alex has put together for the trust. So can I make a motion as the non-chair of the full committee, but the chair of the subcommittee to?
Sure.
Okay. I don't know Robert's rules very well, so I just am gonna. All right. So I move to add the Housing Trust as a co-sponsor of the January 23rd event.
I second it.
Okay, any discussion? I feel like we could do a show of hands, but I'll just go around. Carol, Grover,
Yes.
Alex. Okay, okay,
Yep.
we're all Robin. We're all happy with this.
Yes.
I as well. So, wonderful. Thank you for kind of running with this so effectively. A minor point: if you can make the D and L in Delos Reyes lowercase, that would be nice. Erica, please.
After the presentation by Rob, I really think that he and Ray might actually be great to be part of this, or at least be in the audience to talk about ADUs.
I think that's a good, at least to include them in the invitee list, would be, maybe a targeted invite saying, thank you for coming to our meeting in December. We'd love if you could at least have some representation here. There might be questions, there might be an opportunity for you to make a little pitch or something. So I think that's a great idea. I should probably write these things down.
Questions or comments for the education subcommittee?
Alex, did you want to go over your little pitch?
I can speak to it for a second. Yeah, in interest of time, I just invite everybody to review it if they haven't. It was included in the packet. Our subcommittee has been working on producing some literature, and like the elevator pitch is part of it, but thinking towards a brochure or a flyer or something that we can give to really consistently communicate who we are and what we're doing. So Allegra and I, with Greg in our subcommittee meeting, talked about what's included as a draft. If people have specific feedback, I look forward to welcoming that over email.
Did you say via email?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we can have a discussion as well. Now I'm just trying to be aware of time and letting everything on our agenda be discussed.
Got it. Are we allowed to email that kind of feedback in terms of the open meeting laws? I'm always a little confused about that.
Yeah,
As
I think
long as
so.
it's one-on-one or not a quorum, right?
I see. So I can email Alex directly, but I can't just reply to the thread.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, yeah, and probably not an exchange, probably just email your thoughts and then, we can incorporate them. And I'll note too, like, I just thought it would be cool to include a draft just to demonstrate kind of the work that's happening in that group. But I don't think we've yet proposed that as a formal thing. So
my only comment is that kind of the headlines of our strategy are pretty pithy, right? To build so many homes, raise so much money, and engage the community. I mean, it's all kind of in there, but that 1, 2, 3 might be kind of a follow-on to the pitch. That's my only kind of thought. Erica, is that a new hand?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, John always taught me when we were doing presentations or having conversations is to end with, so what can you do? And so, certainly our subcommittee has some ideas of what people can do. Like you can donate land, you can donate your house. So we can send some of that to you, Alex. But in thinking, I'm sure, part of the presentation that's going to happen on the 23rd, that there's going to be a piece where what people can engage in that can support, affordable housing. I think that was in the housing production plan, that people want to have affordable housing, but they seem to have not a in my backyard type of thing. So anytime we talk to people, I think there's got to be an opportunity of not only what are we doing, but you can also do something.
Perfect.
So rather than try to schedule an email that might get dropped, I'll just say a feedback of something that stuck out to me is a request to not put the word projects after affordable housing because of the negative stigma associated with it. So promote homes that are affordable to Amherst residents, for example, as how I might phrase that.
Good catch. Okay, well, this subcommittee division is really working out. We're getting a lot of fruits of this division of labor. Fundraising team, did you have, yeah, okay, take it away.
Yeah, we unlike the education team, we have not raised any money yet. So I think we've decided that the first thing we're going to try to do is find a way to get this short-term rental income money directed toward the fund. That seems to be the lowest hanging fruit. We've also started developing strategy around approaching the CPA committee for a dedicated contribution every year, and we've also been brainstorming about the creative or innovative ways of raising money that was part of our list of things to do. But again, so we're just laying the groundwork here. We don't have any results to show yet.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm excited to kind of run down our checklist on Monday in the development group. When are we likely to hear from the CPA? Does anyone know what their usual turnaround is?
They just started meeting. I think they have their first meeting tonight, or
Okay.
so it's usually during January, February.
Okay. All right. Okay, I think we're at the end of the agenda. Does anyone have anything that wasn't anticipated to share? Yeah, Erica.
It wasn't anticipated, but it was on the agenda, which was the Western Mass Network.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, and I propose to put that on there through Gaston, and after kind of looking at actually the other requests and kind of looking into the background of that, it's my thought at this point that it's probably outside the bounds. Making a gift like that is probably outside the bounds of what the trust is able to do. So I'm counter my original proposal to include that. I'm suggesting we don't fund it.
And kind of the background is that indeed we did a little just confirming our powers and authorities and conferring with Shelley about the request that we did discuss at length. And the product of that discussion was realizing, okay, it's got to be on the unrestricted side of things here. And but that discussion and review made it seem like there wasn't a very clear anchoring in our set of authorities for basically being kind of contributing members, sponsors. But thank you. We should have reviewed that. I'm glad we did. Okay. Anything else? Well, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I motion we adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth.
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right, very good. Again, we're keeping the schedule, although we shouldn't feel like we have to always go right to 9 o'clock. But at least we're keeping our agendas in check. So thank you. Have a nice night.
Have a nice, thanks, Gaston. Thanks,
Yeah,
Greg.
see you, Carolyn Grover, on Monday.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. See you in the new year.
Happy New Year. All right.